Tree Gardens Breakfast Mountain Morning Black Tea Rainforest Alliance Certified Black Tea Blend. Woo! Let me have a sip of that, baby. I know that there are patrons out there that love it when they get to hear the sound of me drinking something. But let me tell you, on Ice Planet Zero, that being New Hampshire, on Ice Planet Zero, it is a balmy 9 degrees right now. So if you don't mind, I'm going to have some very, very hot tea here. In fact, let me have one more sip. Woo! All right, the man of tomorrow is here for you, baby. And, I had some people wondering, what exactly am I recording on these days? I'm going to do a little review of this microphone at some point because I am nothing less than fucking impressed. This is actually I'm not using my H6. I am not on one of my classic one of my classic microphones from within the BDSM studio. Oh no, this is actually, believe it or not, I am recording on an Amazon Basics microphone. In fact, specifically, it's the Amazon Basics Professional USB Condenser microphone. And I do have a little, I have a pop filter on the front of it. But I'm telling you, I think it sounds better than a Blue Yeti, and it works on everything. Like, it's plugged into a Linux machine right now, and it does a fine job. I mean, it just instantly recognizes it. It has controls right on the front of it, even though they're kind of like touchscreen controls, which it doesn't feel as good. And every time you plug it in, you have to kind of reset the levels on it and everything. Anyway, I'm very pleased with it. I think the sound that comes out of it is actually really, really solid. I am impressed. I mean, they did make it for podcasters, which that's sort of what got me interested in it, was that they said they made it for podcasters and for Amazon the Amazon Basics line in general has been trying to put out quality, though cheap material, that not necessarily like not well built, but cheap material, electronics. They've been doing, as well as they sell other things, clothing, all kinds of shit. Even though they've been putting that out for a little while now, for them to want to concentrate on making equipment for podcasting, not a surprise for a couple reasons. One, of course, is Twitch. The other is that maybe they're still looking at becoming that podcasting platform with Audible at some point. They're always doing interesting things with Audible. But anyway, you're not here for a microphone review. That's for another episode. So why don't we get into, of course, the man of tomorrow here with you. This is your Wednesday Q&A for patrons only. And why don't we go ahead and get into your questions. Before I do want to give a little bit of an update. There was a question asked a couple weeks ago, I suppose, that had to do with Google's Manifest version 3 or Manifest v3 for Google Chrome, which was going to end up breaking ad blockers. There has been an update on that because that was supposed to be unleashed by now, and Google actually ended up backtracking on this. And they backtracked because I think actually Ghostery, which I don't recommend using Ghostery because they sell off your browsing history when they're supposed to be blocking your browser, other companies from getting your browsing history. But they did some research on the matter. I'm going to guess that Ghostery, their business model probably would have been hurt by Manifest v3 that Chrome was going to implement, which again would have broken ad blockers. And the argument was from Google that, well, ad blockers and some of these other extensions that have a certain deeper level of use, or a deeper level of integration, I should say, not use, integration, because not that many people use ad blockers, unfortunately, as much as I wish everybody would. But this deeper level of integration was slowing down web page load times and was slowing down, it was too much of a resource hog for Chrome and all this, which Ghostery pretty much with their own research called Google out and said, no, you're liars. It's your numbers that you've put out just aren't true from your developers. And Google backtracked because they basically admitted that, yeah, Ghostery was right. Their numbers were wrong. So what happened there? What really happened there? And that actually, I'm glad that Google backtracked, but at the same time, this puts pie in the face of Google in a very real way. And it does so because I feel like that's that was Google engaging in some very ugly business practices, basically fudging numbers to a degree to where, I mean, I think ad blockers are hurting Google's like ad business, which is still the primary way that they get funded. But I feel like that they were fudging numbers to effectively, they wanted to put an end to ad blockers. Now, as to where before I was feeling like, maybe they're not being so, maybe they weren't acting in bad faith, I guess I'll say. They weren't acting in bad faith when they were saying, okay, we're going to get rid of ad blockers, or we're going to make it so that ad blockers can't work because they're just affecting your ability to browse the internet with any degree of speed. Yeah, now I feel like, no, they absolutely were acting in bad faith, and that they made up numbers to justify, getting rid of ad blockers so that their ad revenue wasn't hurting. And that's bad. Okay. Now, I'm not saying stop using Chrome or something like that. I mean, look, as much as I hate it, I want everybody using Firefox, of course, or some kind of alternative. But there are arguments, and I've said this for years, there are arguments to be made for why a lot of people really need to use Chrome. Standards, if you have clients that have to use Google services and so on, Chrome allows for certain features to only work within Chrome. Yes, the other web browser companies have tried to sue Google over this matter, or tried to make some kind of a case against Google and try to get some kind of legal action where that they can't do that. But I don't agree with any legal action in this sense. But so I'm not saying don't use Chrome. I'm just saying let's be clear here that Google is not beyond, I think now personally, fudging numbers. And because I have a hard time believing, how the hell did Ghostery get the right numbers and Google's dev teams, somehow got the wrong ones? It's too hard to believe. So I think that this was honestly a malicious action against users, specifically ad block users, on Google's part. So I'm not happy about this. But as to where before, because I was really giving them a bit of the benefit of the doubt that maybe that was true. But no, now we know it's absolutely not true. So just a little update on that story. Next thing in line, I've had a lot of people email me, and I'm not going to do a full review of Mobile World Congress. So here's the thing. One of the things that I wanted to put out for patrons was I used to do reviews of these conferences like Google I/O or the Apple events or Microsoft's, whatever event that they happen to have in October. There's always a lot of these events in October. They're just peddling so much horseshit now that, doing a review of them is just going to be me complaining. Maybe you just want to hear me complain. I don't know. And don't complain unless you have an alternative. Well, the alternative is don't buy their fucking shit. Get ready for my conversation about 5G. That's coming. Okay. That's coming. And cause this is talk about horseshit. But anyway, I had a lot of people asking me about any thoughts on MWC or my thoughts on foldable phones. I got a ton of questions about that. And here's the deal. Foldable phones, we all kind of knew was coming because actually Lenovo did it years ago. They never released the product as far as I know anywhere in the world, but they came up with the foldable phone a long, long time ago, or at least a few years ago anyway. And it didn't exactly take off then, and it wasn't like, the foldable phone that Lenovo came up with, it was like 3 or 4 years ago, didn't look much different than what we ended up seeing at MWC. We got the Galaxy phone that's foldable and all this. And look, these phones are going to end up costing $2,000 a pop. I have a hard time believing that people are going to be willing to spend $2,000 flat on a smartphone. Now, maybe if it's rolled up into, no pun intended, or I should say maybe if it's folded into your phone bill, I guess maybe then you'll do it. But I remember what like Verizon and Sprint and, the other big telcos, even for a phone that costs a couple $100, they'd tack on quite a few dollars. I just have a hard time believing that this is going to be a thing. And what, are you just going to go, ooh, ah, what, the first time you see it unfold? And then what are you going to do with it? Like, I'm not against this technology at all. You know, the idea of a foldable device and everything, like that's kind of cool. But like, I can see where this would work. And actually, if it brought back the clamshell in a way, like dynamite, you know, something where you weren't worried about the face of your phone. Ironically, that's kind of not the direction most people seem to be folding it. But like, if it could cover up and protect the glass and face of your phone, this could be a wonderful thing. I mean, I love the idea of the clamshell, you know, like, I mean, that's why part of the reason I love my Nintendo 3DS and I haven't ran to the Switch yet, because I think the 3DS is such a much more stowable and solid, bit of kit from Nintendo. So, I mean, I guess I'm just saying I'm not against the idea of a foldable phone in the first place, but beyond that, 2000, like, you could buy a full-on gaming laptop. I mean, for half that price, actually, you can get a badass gaming laptop for under $1,000. For under $1,000. Like, now it's to the point where phones cost more than computers. The argument used to be that the reason why like smartphones had taken over and become such a big deal was because they were cheaper than a laptop, but then they gave you the interconnectivity of having a full-on computer, right? But that's not true anymore. Now, I mean, the world is totally turned upside down. And you could say, well, it's just the foldable phones that are that way, and the person that can't afford them is going to end up, only spending a couple $100 on a phone. Yeah, but that's saying, that's making the case, really, I guess, that there's no common sense or no sense in buying a foldable phone, right? And I know what people are going to say. They're going to say, well, yeah, they're $2,000 now, but in a couple generations, foldable phones will only cost like $300. No, I don't believe that either. I don't believe that at all. And I can prove it. Okay. And I know I've got so many people, but the free market. Well, and I know these same people know we're not living in a free market, not in a completely freed market anyway. Sorry. It is not an economic axiom. Okay. And I'm very particular. It's not an axiom. It's not a guarantee that something that hits the market on a long enough timeline will drop in price. There is zero guarantee of that. All right. For one, this foldable phone technology. Now, it should be interesting to note, Corning has been developing foldable glass or flexible glass, right? And they've been working on that for a while. I think they showed it off to CNET a little while back. They did not, like these phones that are coming out from Samsung, and there's a Huawei, I think, and LG also have foldable phones. And Huawei's selling theirs for cheaper, whatever. Okay. They did not have Corning's flexible glass. These foldable phones have like little dots at the fold. It is multiple pieces of glass involved here. It's not like a solid piece. Will that time come? Will Corning's flexible glass finally become a thing? Maybe. And I mean maybe. That, because talk about something that's been in the works for a long time. Corning has been working on that for a long, long time. And I know about, there's OLED screens that allow for like folding and everything. I mean, it gets, anyway, that's a whole other thing, but you lose certain, I don't want to say pixel density, but you lose certain clarity when you use like foldable OLED, like it's almost like a fabric that can display and that can act as a display. There's a company out of Israel that's been developing that for a long time. We talked about that on Sovereign Tech years ago, like 5-6 years ago. I mean, that's the thing, but nobody's, they're not going that direction. I mean, just as a side note, I do think the reason that a lot of phone companies with their premier phones have been shifting to glass backs for their phones is probably to start prepping you for when your entire phone is going to be glass. Right. And for foldable phones, where you're going to fold it in half, use it like a normal, well, quote unquote, normal, like whatever, 16:9 or 21:9 aspect ratio, whatever, depending on the how tall your phone is. And you're holding the glass at the back. I think that was definitely to prep you for that because they knew that this is going to be coming. And I mean, certainly foldable phones have been getting hyped for a while now. But anyway, that's just kind of a side note. And just so that you understand that these companies, when they iterate, it is to, slowly get you used to kind of the next thing. Anyway, bottom line that I'm trying to get to with these foldable phones, the complexity of, foldable electronics in general. okay, is, I mean, because it's not just the screen. Like you have parts here, okay, that have to bend, all right, with this phone, and depending upon how far they want to go, I mean, if anything, it's just going to get more complex. And here's the rub. Here's the greatest example of where just because something has been in the market for a long time does not mean that it goes down in price. Sushi. Something as simple as sushi. Sushi is a very complex food. And because of this, and it's a very precise food. Because of this, sushi has, since it's been introduced to the United States and become like a thing, has never gone down in price. It is always, it's at a flatline price. You can make a profit selling sushi. You really can. All right. But you're never going to drop the prices of it. You can have whole businesses, and there are, what is it, Sushi Go or whatever the fuck. There's places you can go where that's all they do is sushi on a conveyor belt, pretty much, and it literally rolls out around your table. Those prices never go down. They will never go down. They will continue to increase, adjusting for inflation. And that's my point, is that there are some things that you can introduce in the market that have a complexity or whatever. I mean, it is literally a complexity of some kind that will just keep it from dropping in price. Okay. And I don't believe that foldable phones are ever going to get into the $500 range or even the $1,000 range. I just don't, unless it comes out of, I can't see it. I mean, unless they start doing like the OLED, or kind of what I mentioned, if it's the OLED fabric screens, maybe then, but not with the glass. But I don't see anybody doing that because for some reason there is a strange obsession by tech companies, by phone manufacturers with more and more pixel density, more, greater resolutions and everything. And those foldable OLED screens those fabric OLED screens aren't going to allow for that. So in fact, it'll be quite the opposite. And that's fine with me, but that's not fine, apparently, with these tech companies. So I think these foldable phones, again, I'm not opposed to technology in and of itself, but I think they're completely impractical. I think spending $2,000 on a smartphone is positively fucking ridiculous. These things are commodities. If you're spending $2,000 on a smartphone, like, I'll just say it, I got to question your priorities in life, Like, I mean, what are you going to say? So you can get shit done? There's no way you can get you can be as productive on a foldable smartphone as you can on some $2,000 laptop. There's just, I mean, the argument can't even be made. And fuck the battery life. Holy shit. I don't even want to know. That was a cool thing to come out of MWC is Energizer, of all things. I mean, obviously it's not like Energizer and their own factories are making this. They're working with another company, but Energizer battery branded phones, they're coming out with and I think it's later in 2019, I think this summer, they're going to release these phones. They're huge. They're like 3 times the size of just about any other smartphone you've got. And it has like an 18,000 milliampere battery. I mean, this thing's going to last a week. It's going to be crazy, but it's this really thick phone, comes with Android 9 and everything. Now you're talking. Now that's a smartphone. Okay. Like that's giving people what they want. You watch Energizer become one of like the biggest smartphone companies in the world after that, because that's what people have actually fucking wanted. Who the fuck was asking for a foldable smartphone? I mean, or a foldable glass anyway. I mean, there's people who've been clamoring for clamshell smartphones. Sure, myself included. But, oh, fucking A. No, this is, I wouldn't be surprised. For example, 3D televisions. Who the hell has a 3D television? Like that technology came and fucking went. And I said it would too. Like I totally called that was not going to last. Or how about curved TVs? These things have just come and gone. Nobody gives a rat shit. I think foldable smartphones, like people are like, oh, wow, that's cool. And then they're going to realize that, holy shit, I just spent $2,000 and I don't do anything different than that flat fondle slab that I had been using for 5 years previous. This is not going to take off. My mind is boggled. Okay, maybe if Apple released it, people would do it, but, iPhones come at the cost of more money than sense. I mean, that's really, really how that, in my opinion, how that ends up going. So color me wholly unimpressed with foldable smartphones. My prediction is they'll die off in a couple generations because they're not going to go down in price. And I mean, this whole thing with smartphones where, Apple's running into this. We've talked about that, where they have to raise the prices of smartphones just to justify the constant iterative releases. I mean, I think a foldable smartphone, genuinely probably does cost $2,000, to put all that together, or it costs around that anyway, where that price makes some kind of sense. But in general, these companies are just constantly increasing the price of these smartphones because they have projections they have to meet. And, people aren't buying smartphones the way that they used to, not in droves. There's not the growth anymore. Everybody's already got a smartphone. And if anything, they're spending a couple $100 on something out of China. So, Samsung's just not raking it in anymore. Even though they did kind of release a budget phone of sorts. It's interesting. It should be telling how many of these companies are having to do that, Apple included, right? With the 10R and so on. Even I don't know if I'd call that a budget phone. What is it? Whatever the price was on that thing. Anyway, this is just stupidity, and they're going to try. And I mean, I guess to some degree, I applaud Samsung and I've applauded them for this before. What they develop in R&D, the prototypes that they put out there, they will actually bring them to market. I have to give them credit for that because there's so much cool shit that I've seen in my lifetime. Okay. In my decades on this earth, that you'd see a prototype in a magazine and it would never hit production. I got to give Samsung credit for actually bringing shit into production and to the consumer market. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that every idea that they bring out is a good one. And foldable phones, I don't see it. And maybe, maybe I'll be wrong, but I don't think so. All right, let's get into to another question here. I'm going to try and get to a lot of questions because last week we had a little bit of a shorter show. Actually, it ended up going the distance, I think. All right, whatever. Anyway, I want to try and get to as many of these questions as I can. Here we go. So, hey, man of tomorrow, I've heard you sing the praises of using a NAS. Particularly Synology. So I'll stop right there. NAS, network area storage. It's like your own little server in a box that doesn't have everything else that a computer traditionally has. It's just a, hard drive enclosed that has like some really interesting software on it. And yes, I generally recommend Synology NASs because They come with really great software that allows you to interact with, well, anyway, we'll talk about that, but it allows you to interact with your data that you store on said NAS. All right, anyway, so particularly Synology. And I've looked into it, but they seem to be an expensive proposition in comparison to using something that merely pulls from a hard drive in or connected to your computer, such as Plex. Is there a particular reason why you don't recommend these apps/services? Keep rocking the amazing content, Savzu. Well, first off, thank you. I will keep rocking the amazing content. In fact, a lot of you, I heard from you, very much enjoyed the Sovereign 316 episode, Sovereign Tech Prime episode that came out this week. And thank you. And, more of that to come in the future. I don't want to do that often, but I think it'd be fun to do some of those best ofs again. And, well, anyway, that's another conversation for another time. But because you all requested it, that's the reason I did it. Otherwise, I would have never done it. I'm happy to just record new shit every week. Anyway, okay. So to answer your question, to talk about this, look, I do recommend Plex. Like, I have no problem with Plex. The reason, and I'll talk more about that, the reason that I recommend using a NAS is that a NAS can do a lot more than Plex can do a lot more. There's other ones. There's like a Tonido. It's Tonido. If I think of it, I'll link to it in the show notes. There's Tonido, like where basically you could have it either on your computer or you could have an external hard drive hooked up and you install this software. You have the software look at and index a folder or hard drive, like a folder on that hard drive or the hard drive itself. And then you can remotely access whatever files are on there through your computer, your home computer, or, whatever. I mean, actually, some of that can even work with a NAS as well. Like Plex can work as a NAS can work as a Plex server. I don't know if Tonido can exactly do that. But basically, it will let you interact with those files wherever you happen to be, even on your smartphone or, whatever. You can use it anywhere. So the thing is that Tornado and Plex, those kinds, like they don't generally offer the amount of things that you can do with a NAS. Like with the NAS, there's a lot of Office software built in, especially with Synology. They have great Office software that you can use. There's note software. There's chat programs that you can use right off of the NAS. There's so much more that you can do. And also, like if you only, I don't know how common it is. I don't know if anyone's ever done a study on this. I suppose I should look. I don't know how common it is for people to have like multiple computers. Apparently people just want a smartphone, don't even want a computer anymore, and they'll spend $2,000 on the fucking smartphone. Mind fucking blown. But or boggled, I should say, not blown, mind boggled. But anyway, I don't know how many people have multiple computers. But part of the nice thing of a NAS is that, okay, you don't have to spend the money you would traditionally on a very nice computer that can handle all that. And if you only have like a laptop and a smartphone, you can access that NAS wherever you are. And also, and you don't have to worry about it. You just kind of like leave it and it just runs and it keeps running, forever. As to where, like, say if you're running Plex or Tornado on a Windows computer, at some point, and this is one of the disadvantages of using Windows in general, at some point you're going to have to restart that machine. And in fact, if you don't set it right, Microsoft, especially with Windows 10, Microsoft will force your computer to reboot. And once your computer reboots, if you're using it for Plex or if you're using it for Tornado, and say you're traveling, say you're overseas or just far away from home or whatever, you're kind of fucked. Because your computer restarted and now you can't access your files while you're remote. So I'm not saying Plex or Tornado are bad things, but if you're somebody that travels a bit and that's part of the reason that you want a NAS. In fact, I had somebody else message me about using a NAS. I have to get back with them. But anyway, like a Windows machine is not going to do you well. Now you could say you could run it on Linux and then you never have to reboot. Sure. Yep. That's true. That's one of the advantages of Linux is there's Linux machines out there that have been running for decades and have never been turned off, like ever. You understand? That's a fact. There really are machines out there that are doing that. They're probably running Slackware, but they're out there. And then I suppose, you could run Plex on that, or maybe even Tornado or something. I don't know if Tornado has Linux packages, but I know Plex can. But, these are the things you have to consider. Now, that doesn't mean that a NAS doesn't have to be rebooted every once in a while. Like a Synology NAS, when it gets a software update, it does. But 9.99999 times out of 10, that NAS will just boot right up on its own. Will boot right back up and, log in and blah, 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 and away you go. Okay. There are times where your NAS can reboot from a software update and maybe it won't power back on correctly, and, then you're kind of screwed. But bottom line being, that's kind of the advantage there. So now if you have like a desktop running somewhere, and you have a laptop as well, and you want to use the desktop as like your Plex, kind of a Plex server while doing other things, I guess, then that's okay, because then you can use your laptop and you can still carry it off and you can still access all your files stored on Plex. Again, I like Plex just fine. It's pretty amazing what it can do. It handles so much, and they've really been adding in a lot of features to it, right? And a lot of like content that is specific to Plex, that not even your own content, but content that they're putting out there. It's great for podcasts, it's great for audiobooks, it's great for all kinds of things. And as far as like, before anybody asks like the different, like Tornado and Plex, which ones do I recommend between those? I totally recommend Plex. I've messed with Plex, and the best thing that it had going for it was how it presents your music collection. In fact, it does a fantastic job of that. It's beautiful. The UI and the UX in general is amazing for your music collection. Like with Tornado, it's way too basic. And if you have a large collection, it's very hard to navigate through it. With Synology NAS, they have their own audio app, and it does a great job. It's called DS Audio. That does a phenomenal job. But Plex definitely wins in that department, where the presentation overall and ease of finding what you're looking for is fantastic. But again, you could also use Plex with a NAS if you wanted to do that, including a Synology NAS. You can install it right from their little app store built into their software. So yeah, that's mainly my argument, is that most people don't have multiple computers, I think, to where they could even do that. You could set up a Raspberry Pi as a Plex server as well. That's possible now. It wasn't always possible. It is now. That's an interesting proposition because that's something that doesn't have to reboot over and over again, right? But yeah, again, you do often, and I suppose with some things you could set up Wake on LAN and anyway, I think a NAS is just a more solid thing, but it depends. If you're not far away from home often, then you don't need a NAS. Sure. Like then I have no problem recommending, Tonito or Plex or something like that. Go ahead and use that software. It'll work great for you, especially if you can keep your eye on it. And when you're rebooting the computer and you can bring it back up and make sure that your Plex server is up and going and everything. But if you're somebody that travels quite a bit, I don't know that that's and you're away from home long stretches at a time and you rely. I rely upon, a NAS or, whatever software for my music. And my music is very important to me. Obviously, I do an album of the week every week. It's because I listen to a shit ton of music. It's really important to me to be able to remotely access my stuff. Okay. So, and I do travel often. So, Plex doesn't exactly deliver everything I need, but if it were a pinch, yeah, it can work. And if I needed to do it on the cheap, yeah, it could work, but just understand that there are issues with that. So anyway, because I agree. Yeah. NAS is an expensive proposition to do it right and to store, say the amount of data that I generally like to store. Yeah. You're going to hash out as much as a computer, frankly. But also you're going to get something more robust for what we're talking about doing with it, for having remote access to files or even running small teams, which is something more that you can do with NAS. Like I said, Plex and Tonito don't allow for everything that you can do with a good Synology NAS. They just don't. There's so many features missing. You do get what you pay for in this case. And yeah. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on that. Let's get into our next question here. This one's a bit of a long one from just a tremendous patron, man that I just love. And here we go. Hi, Brian. Thanks for responding to all my questions. Stallion breaking in. He's been asking a few lately, and I love them. I enjoy them. And anyway, here's another one. And it might be that I just don't get the impact these things have, but regarding the Sinister 6 and avoidance of so many services / websites just because they're on Amazon AWS. Now, real quick, the Sinister 6 is what I called the tech giants. Okay, in the recent, not Sovereign 316, but in episode 315 of Sovereign Tech, where it's the Living Without the Tech Giants, I think was the title of it. That's where I talked about, Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Samsung. Okay, that's the Sinister 6. So yeah, and we talked about the story for a rehash. We talked about the story by Kashmir Hill, where she tried to live for a certain amount of time without using any of the tech giants' services. And her biggest one that she ran into, which we talked about, was Amazon's AWS, which powers a massive chunk of the internet. And she couldn't even use, like we said, she couldn't even use Signal, right? The Signal app, because it used AWS as part of its backend servers or as part of its backend. So that all of that was blocked off from, and she just could barely even get on the internet basically, or there was much of the internet she could not use because she was using a private VPN or an independent VPN that was specifically set up to block Amazon. Okay. So anyway, reading on. I get trying to send a market signal of boycotting websites because of the services they use, but is it really a privacy risk? Amazon allows isolation and security with encryption at rest through the use of keys generated and controlled by the user. Maybe an amateur company doesn't know how to utilize AWS key management services, but guaranteed DuckDuckGo and others are doing it right. I don't get the extremism of avoiding them at all costs other than what admittedly was an experiment to prove a point. I guess my point is that we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater and try identifying those services that actually do erode our privacy and build a more realistic approach or toolkit to evade those. That way, there is a much higher likelihood of success for people to actually adopt pro-privacy lifestyle choices. Boycotting the tech giants? Well, that's another story, and I applaud her efforts. Yeah, okay, so I agree with you. And that's why I was saying, or I hope I said it in the episode. I'm not saying don't use Signal, right? Because it accesses AWS services. And in fact, even going as far as Kashmir Hill did, and we talked about this, we ran into the issues where you have to start blocking CDNs, right? And then when you start blocking CDNs, you might be blocking complete, services that aren't taking advantage of any of this bullshit, that aren't related to the tech giants, that are very good and wonderful things just because they're using a CDN. But you had to block the CDN because that was the only way to make sure that you weren't somehow, even if it wasn't coming from IP addresses directly at Facebook or Amazon or whatever, but it made sure that you were blocking their content. Okay. And yeah, it was more or less a thought experiment, right? That this is just how bad it is. So you got that right. And I agree with the statement that just because you're using AWS does not mean that you're somehow pwned by Amazon, does not mean that somehow there's a privacy concern, because I don't have privacy concerns, or at least not related to them using AWS when it comes to Signal. I don't. Okay. I trust that as much as and I'm not saying trust anything, but I'm saying I trust it as much as I trust any service. And so you're right. DuckDuckGo is using key management right on. I don't doubt that for a second. Okay. But it does, again, my point, and I think Kashmir Hill's point, is what you said, where it's highlighting just how much reach these companies have, and how if they did shut down tomorrow, just how much honestly would be shut down, right? In fact, I would argue that, and it's ironic because I'm recording this on an Amazon microphone, right? I would argue that the reason, if you had a reason to block AWS, the real reason that you'd want to do that would be to hurt Amazon's pocketbook if you have, and hey, I think there are reasons to do so. If you have concerns or beef, shall we say, with Amazon, that would be the real valid case to make for why you wouldn't want to use AWS. But the idea of being concerned about privacy, no, you're totally right. They do have things set up with key management services to where your privacy isn't really an issue. Okay, not in the way that maybe Kashmir Hill was talking about it. But this all gets back to a point and something we've been pushing for, even though maybe I haven't talked about it in a while, but that we've been pushing for a very long time with Sovereign Tech. And that is creating a genuinely decentralized internet, where it's not reliant upon the server structure. Now, I mean, I got excited about technologies like MadeSafe and a bunch of others, but, they're not here yet. And they some of these may never be here. Okay. Or you have like RetroShare. Sure. RetroShare is a totally viable internet alternative, not just a file sharing or a messaging alternative. It's an internet alternative. You understand? But the thing is that, well, because of the way that it works, because you don't have servers that you can access that are powered on at all times, RetroShare requires you to be like constantly sending data packets. And the reason that, not that I stopped using RetroShare, but the reason I backed off of RetroShare was because at the time I was traveling a lot and bringing a laptop with me, and it took my laptop's 10 hours of battery and turned it into about 1.5 hours of battery because of the constant connectivity that was required of it. Okay. So so basically saying that especially right now, though in the future, this might be the case too, any viable decentralized internet alternative that is either in plans right now or exists right now has a serious issue in that, maybe you can have kind of like we were talking about with like NASA's and like a Plex server and all this. Maybe at home, everybody could have like a specific box set up, but then how does that not a server? But you could have something set up where you store your own files, and then maybe with your smartphone, you could access them, maybe remotely from that by bouncing off of, various Wi-Fi direct and whatever other signals that happen to be out there that are accessible for you, creating a mesh network of a type. Maybe you could do something like that. But either way, for a decentralized internet to become a thing, there is a mindset shift that has to occur in people to where if you still want the mobility, say, of a laptop, okay, and yet you are working localized, or your device is part of this distributed internet or decentralized, people have arguments around is distributed and decentralized the same thing. I get it. Okay. But I hope you know what I mean by it. you're going to have that constant connectivity. So either we put massive fucking batteries in our devices again, which, hey, Energizer, good for you. And Lenovo, let me detach the battery and put in an aftermarket one again, for fuck's sake, where I can have 30 hours of battery life with a sliced battery, in my ThinkPad again. Believe me, give me that. I'll take it. And that way, you can run a laptop running, say, RetroShare, and it could still give you at least 10 hours of battery life, right? Like, by all means, I'll take it. But I guess I would almost argue, based upon your question, and I hear you, like we're not, and this is something I've been saying for a little while. I've been kind of I haven't changed my mind, but as far as what I present out to the world on sovereign tech, I'm taking a little more of a practical stance, because the extreme stances require such a massive shift in the way people are used to doing things. Like, an easy thing to do, say, like with the example of RetroShare. If people got used to working offline more, and then would only connect when they need to message people, or they only check their messages once a day and so on, then you could have where, okay, you open RetroShare for an hour and your laptop could still work for such and so much time. But that's just not going to work, because now you have people working as remote teams. I mean, there just are such dramatic shifts that have to happen within the technological infrastructure that we have already, the way that people would think about even using their laptops or even their smartphones and so on, to make a lot of this viable. But right now, people can use things that, while, yes, to make them, say, free, makes economic sense, like the Signal app, okay, to encrypt their shit, but Signal can operate on a lower budget and with a small team, because they rely upon AWS to handle a good chunk of the workload. Okay. So, that's your point is on, like, why throw out the baby with the bathwater and all that. I agree with you. Okay. Especially if we're going to get people starting to use this stuff. And even if we're going to get to that mindset change, not that it's incremental. I think going from having your shit open-ended and readable by the tech giants, as compared to encrypting it, that's not incremental. That is huge. Like, that is a massive change in how people think about things. That is a dramatic shift. That is a moonshot in a very real sense. So let's get people there. Then we start talking about, okay, well, why do we need to encrypt these things? And then you start talking about corporatism, the tech giants, and so on. I would argue that the only way we can have a world without tech giants is by getting to where we are used to operating with mesh networks, a distributed or decentralized internet, whatever. That's the only way we're actually going to get rid of tech giants, because they have us all by the balls with their servers, and getting to a serverless future. I used to say that all the time. That's just going to take such a huge mindset shift, and not just a mindset shift, but it's going to take a shift in the manufacturing process of our own technology. My opinion. That's my opinion. And if you disagree on that, like, feel free to get in touch with me. There's ways where we could allow for, the amount of traffic and the amount of data getting sent out and everything, we could shrink that down. But that gets into a point that I've brought up many times, and that is that, we could have distributed or decentralized internet. We could have mesh networks and all that stuff right now, but fuck, people just can't get over video. They have to have their YouTube. And so we're never going to get there if that's still a thing. And video is such a hard problem. There are so many companies, Google included, that are trying to shrink, that are trying to compress video. And now we're talking about 4K and all this crap. And for some reason, people seem to be buying into that. Or maybe that's just a perception that the Sinister Six are putting on you that, oh yeah, no, people actually care about 4K. I don't believe it, but I do believe it. I think that there are, like, a lot of the mundanes, as I often will call them. I think they buy into 4K, and they buy into it every year around this time of year when they get their tax return, and they go out and buy a new TV. So somehow they just buy they need a new TV every year or something. It blows my fucking mind, or boggles my mind. But blowing your mind should be something that's like, wow, I had this realization. Boggling your mind is where you can't grasp why people do these things. So anyway, those are the issues at hand. I agree with you. I'm really not arguing like getting away from AWS. The only argument I would make for AWS isn't a privacy one. It's more of, there's a privacy issue overall with other things that have to do with Amazon. And the only way to put a stop to them is to hurt them in the pocketbook. And not using AWS does hurt them in the pocketbook, but it'd have to be a groundswell that does that, right? So I think making the argument of privacy in AWS, I agree with you. It's flawed. But making the economic argument against Amazon in using AWS, that makes more sense, but anyway, all of this takes really dramatic shifts in mindset. So there we go. Okay. So I hope I answered that. But again, I agree with you. If I sounded like I was saying, don't use Signal, I'm not saying that at all. Okay. I mean, if you don't want to use Signal, if you want arguments for not using Signal, look at your backup file of your years of Signal use. And maybe there's an argument there for why not to use Signal, because, maybe then you want to use Telegram, but then you're not going to, that just raises the issue of if everything's kind of localized, we have to change, basically what I'm saying is the Signal app, if you do a backup file and you've been using Signal for a long time, your backup file could be, depending upon how many friends you have and how much media you share. And in fact, Signal just added in the feature to, they added in a couple of new features, but they added in the feature to send photo albums now. And again, you're taking photos. Generally, we're talking about sending photos that are in the 4K resolution now, because for whatever fucking reason. Okay. You're sending huge files. And if you do a backup file of all that and you don't want to delete those pictures, or delete really you'd have to, you could delete the individual message. But there's so much you would have to do to make a manageable backup size for Signal on a smartphone, where the average smartphone today still is probably at 16 gig as far as storage, because a lot of people are using smartphones that are years old. You're going to run into an issue there where you can't even make a backup file anymore because it's multiple gigs in size. And that points to where if we actually had where everything's being done, say, store and forward, and everything's being locally stored, to where it would even allow for where you didn't need servers. Signal still uses servers, but you get my point. The storage is a very real issue, an easy one to lick, but we'd have to change the manufacturing process of all these big companies for them to recognize that we need terabytes inside of our smartphones, not 16 gig or 32 gig even, just to store everything that we want to do and to be able to communicate and to be able to do it right. I understand why people go to Telegram, because it gets stored on servers, right? Of course, where are Telegram servers? It's a great question. And like I said, I didn't have an answer to that. But anyway, depending upon what you're doing, if it's a secret chat, it's a different story, but with Telegram. But anyway, so there you go. We need a change in mindset and a change in the manufacturing process, okay, to where we have massive hard drives and massive batteries, which I think everybody would want anyway, even as things are, even in our server-filled world. Okay, or server-fueled world, that's a better term for it, as compared to serverless. I think people would want that anyway, but I don't know, maybe we'll get it. And it looks like some companies are trying to differentiate and see this market desire, like Energizer of all fucking things. I'm still amazed by that. Anyway, okay, so there you go. I hope I answered that. It might be a great conversation. If you have more to add on to that, I'd love to continue that conversation about that. So, all right, let's get into our album of the week and we'll wrap this baby up. For the album of the week, oh, fuck, do I have a doozy. Do I have a beauty of an album. I am so excited about this. In just a couple days, one of my favorite bands ever, Queensryche, is going to be releasing a new album. I'm so excited for that. It's called The Verdict, actually. I think I got the name wrong last time that I talked about it. But what an amazing time we live in. What a year. When we live in a year in 2019, when on February 22nd, we had a new Dream Theater album come out, which is maybe the most comparable band to Queensryche, even though there's so much more. But they had their new album come out called Distance Over Time. Now, as far as I know, they still don't have Mike Portnoy, but you've got James LaBrie and the boys and, everybody there. And this is, while I don't think, so the album's called Distance Over Time. And it's just, the point I was going to make was that it's just so cool that we get a Dream Theater album and a Queensryche album within like a couple weeks of each other. Teenage me is so happy right now. So fucking happy. We're getting so many great albums, really that have been coming, that are going to be coming out in 2019. It's going to be one of those magical music years. The Distance Over Time, the album, not exactly like the best one that I've heard from them. It's better than, oh shit, what was the name of they had that concept album come out recently. It was like a double disc concept album. It was good. Like I really liked their double disc concept, but it wasn't, I don't know. what was that? The Astonishing, right? I think that was the name of the album. It's better than The Astonishing. I liked The Astonishing a lot. Concept album that was telling this whole story and everything. I mean, that was really cool. Felt like what a lot of like 70s prog rock was doing, which Dream Theater is very much a progressive metal band. I mean, maybe the best in the world, unless you want to count Queensryche as a progressive metal band. But I think Queensryche kind of defies a lot of metal genres. But anyway, Distance Over Time, the new album, is phenomenal, but it's not, there's the one that came out in 2011, Dramatic Turn of Events. That album was great. That was their first one without Portnoy, and they needed to come out strong with that. And they opened right up with their first track on the Back of Angels. I love that album. I love that album. Distance Over Time is not as good as that album, in my opinion, but it's still a very, very solid outing. It opens up really heavy with Untethered Angel. Then it goes into Paralyzed, which is basically the first single off of the album. And it's if you get the bonus track version, it's a simple 10 tracks. The bonus track, Viper King, is probably the weakest track on the album, which is kind of interesting because often enough, like when you get Japanese versions of these albums where they have the bonus tracks and everything, the bonus tracks sometimes are like the best songs on the album. That happens a lot. That's happened with Hailstorm in the past. That's happened with Bon Jovi. That's happened with quite a few different bands that I can think of where the bonus tracks are like, wait, I wouldn't have bought this album without the bonus tracks because the bonus tracks are fucking awesome. But this is one where the bonus track is a little weak. So, whatever. But the last song on it, traditionally the last song, which is track 9, which is Pale Blue Dot, that is a brilliant epic. And it is dedicated to Carl Sagan, who you may have heard recently, heard words from, beautiful words from, or important words from, in actually the Sovereign 316 episode. But this is another outing from Dream Theater where every track is really solid, but it's not as strong as Dramatic Turn of Events. It is better than The Astonishing, though. And The Astonishing's only been out, a couple of years. I mean, this is a really fast turnaround for an album. But I'm very pleased with it, and I didn't see it coming. I wasn't aware that it was going to be coming out, but I really, really love it. If you're a Dream Theater fan, or if you like prog rock and prog metal and everything, there's a lot to love within this, and a lot of really fun stuff. I think I need to catch these boys in concert, quite frankly, because I mean, even without Portnoy, and Portnoy is just one of the greatest drummers ever, I have been so pleased with what they have been, like I said, this isn't as strong as maybe other previous albums that have come out recently, but it's still a very, very good album. I've been so pleased with what they've been putting out there. I want to hear it. In fact, I think we're right now, what is it, like the 20th anniversary of Metropolis Part 2, which is one of my favorite albums ever from anyone. And if you've never listened to Dream Theater, don't start with this. Start with Images and Words. That's an album from quite a few years ago. But start with that. And then maybe, you could go to this or go to a Dramatic Turn of Events and then listen to this if you're new to Dream Theater. But fuck, if I could get people into Dream Theater, I mean, you're just in for an amazing, amazing, brilliant, intellectual ride. And that's one of the beautiful things about prog, progressive metal and prog rock is that, you really get that intellectualism, the complexity and everything. I mean, it's there for you. So very excited. Next week, you can pretty much be guaranteed I'm going to review the Queensryche album, the new Queensryche album. So it's kind of fitting to do, Dream Theater this week because those two bands have always stood toe to toe for me. Or guys like Fate's Warning are another, lesser known, but in this vein. So anyway, check out the new Dream Theater, Distance Over Time. Really a very, very good album. If you haven't listened to Dream Theater in a while, I recommend starting with the Dramatic Turn of Events. If you're into concept albums, The Astonishing is it's a very worthy listen, and one of the better concept albums I've ever heard, certainly in recent years. I mean, it's not Operation Mindcrime, but it's good. It's very good. So is Distance Over Time. So check that out. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. You still have more content. I know there's only a couple days left to February. You still have a lot more content to come out this month. So get ready for it. And a lot of exciting announcements to come throughout March. So stick with me. I will see all of you on the other side.